That is why they want to eliminate Traore. When the colonialists came, they told us that everything about us was wrong. They told our women, straighten your hair, bleach your skin, abandon your nails. They told us, and we believed them. They told us that our names were not good. So they told us that when you are a Christian, you must adopt a name which is essentially English or French. But they told us it's Christian. The impact is great and alive and well. They even told us that our languages are bad. That's why I'm addressing you in a foreign tongue. I would have addressed you in Kiswahili. They even described us as Lusophone to mean we speak Portuguese, Francophone to mean we speak French, and Anglophone to mean we speak English, so that many of you young people will learn about this continent courtesy of history. This continent was overrun, and our sons and daughters were taken away, so that when we celebrate or commemorate Africa Day, and by extension Pan-Africanism, today we are assembled here to remind ourselves that after slavery there was another project, the colonial project. European powers, all of them, in 1884 and 1885, sat down in Berlin, in Federal Republic of Germany, and divided the continent into spheres of influence. The Portuguese were there, and they took their colonies. They took Angola, they took Cabo Verde, they took Guinea-Bissau, they took Mozambique. The French were there. They took Togo, they took Benin, they took Burkina Faso, they took Mali, they took Guinea. The British were there. They took what is now Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, Malawi, which was then Nyasaland, Zimbabwe. They took Somaliland. The Italians were there. They took Libya. They took Somalia. The Germans were there. We should never forget. They took what was then Tanganyika. They took Togo. They took Dahomey. They took what is now Namibia. They were there. The Dutch were there. All of them were there. And Adekeye Adebayo, one of the great African writers, writes a book, The Curse of Berlin, in which he looks at the continent of Africa and looks at her after Berlin and the creation of the countries that we now know, complete with passports, and which we are proud of, and for which we fight and spill blood. But even during those difficult days, when the continent of Africa was under colonial domination, the desire to regain independence was always alive. When, courtesy of history, you read about Pan-Africanism, you'll meet individuals such as Henry Sylvester Williams of Trinidad and Tobago, who convened the first Pan-African meeting in the year 1900 in London, England. You'll meet individuals such as George Padmore, individuals such as Marcus Mosias Garvey. They were thinking about liberating the continent of Africa not only from the chains of slavery, but colonization. Indeed, it can be argued that aside from Ethiopia, which was never successfully dominated, and Liberia, which became a settlement for freed slaves under the Monroe Doctrine, the rest of the continent of Africa was under colonial tutelage. And the spirit of Pan-Africanism that was planted in 1900s by our kith and kin who had been enslaved became the basis of organized struggle for independence. It left the Caribbean and came to the United States of America, where great men such as W.E.B. Du Bois, sometimes referred to as the father of modern day Pan-Africanism, were in the forefront of the struggle for liberation of black people. Those of you who are South Africans will have heard of a great South African who at age 27 was a student at the University of Columbia and delivered one of the most iconic speeches ever delivered on Africa, Pixley Kaisaka Seme, one of the founders of the African National Congress. And I urge you to go and read his speech delivered in the month of April 1906, the regeneration of Africa. The spirit was to regain independence so that when the fourth Pan-African meeting is held in 1945 in Manchester in the United Kingdom, which is not so united as we know, Africans are there. Kwame Nkrumah is there. Nigeria's Obafemi Awolowo is there. Kenya's Jomo Kenyatta is present in Manchester. And the struggle to regain independence starts in earnest. It is a struggle. But we must never forget that even when we talk about independence in the 1940s, at the beginning, there were rebellions. There was resistance. Who amongst you here will not remember Shaka of the Zulu? Who among you here will forget Mukwawa of the Hehe and the Maji Maji rebellion? Who among you here will not remember Dedan Kimathi Washiuri and Mau Mau? Who amongst you here will not remember Hari Thuku? The resistance was there Those of you who are from Uganda, you will remember Kabarega of the Bunyoro Kitara, and many great individuals. So when we commemorate Africa Day, and we situate it in history in the month of May 1963, we must never ever forget that there is a long history. Students of history will remember a great Congolese, V.Y. Mudimbe, who passed on just a few months ago, and his two iconic books defining Africa. But the history that we are commemorating today is the culmination of a process which, as I've said, started in 1945 and sees the emergence of great Africans across the continent seeking to regain independence from the colonizers. So that in South Africa, we begin to see individuals such as Chief Albert Lutuli in South Africa. We begin to see Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, Pixley Kaisa Kaseme. You go to Namibia, you meet individuals such as the late Sam Nujoma and Andimba Haman Toivo Yatoivo. You go to Mozambique, you find great people such as Eduardo Mondlane and Samora Moises Marshall. And in Zimbabwe, greats such as Robert Gabriel Mugabe. Never to forget that in Angola, you have individuals such as Agostino Neto. And as you come up, you meet Kenneth David Kaunda and Simon Kapwepwe. And of course, Hastings Kamuzubanda. In that part of the world, Africa is rising. You come to the east, you find many great, Julius Kambarage Nyerere, Jomo Kenyatta, Apollo Milton Obote at that time made sense. Patrice Emery Lumumba in the Congo. You go to West Africa, great such as Nnamdi Azikiwe, Amilcar Cabral. Africa is rising. And when Ghana regains independence in 1957, it is great. Historians will tell you that the first country to regain independence in that sense a little earlier is Sudan in 1956. And others will tell you it is Egypt in 1922. But Ghana's is iconic because it is the first time that a sub-Saharan country is regaining independence. And I want you to listen to the speech delivered by the Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah. He tells his audience on that day that the independence of Ghana means nothing if the rest of Africa is not free. And it is the beginning of a wave, the recognition that if we regain independence as individual countries, then we will be weak because the neo-colonial project is alive and well. And that is why in 1961 in Casablanca, Morocco, a meeting is convened to begin to think about African unity. But the neo-colonial project is alive and well. The colonialists are already telling some Africans that you should not unite. They convene another meeting in Monrovia and another one in Brazzaville to delay the unification of the continent of Africa.